You know, we all think a promise is a promise, right? Well, it turns out in the eyes of the law, it's a little more complicated than that. Today, we're going to unpack a really fascinating legal puzzle from the 19th century, all about a doctor, a debt, and why a handshake deal might not be enough. And believe me, this same rule can still catch you out today. Okay, let's just jump right in. Picture this. You owe a friend $500. Times are a little tight, and your friend, being awesome, says, "Hey, don't worry about it. Just pay me $300 and we'll call it even." So you do. You pay the $300. Are you officially off the hook? I mean, most of us would say, yeah, of course. But the law? Well, the law has a very surprising answer to that question.
And to find that answer, we have to go back in time to a real-life courtroom drama from the 1870s. So let's meet the two people at the center of a case that would seriously shape contract law for, well, centuries to come.
All right, our main characters are a Dr. John Folks and a Mrs. Julia Beer, and the situation is pretty serious. A court had already ruled that Dr. Folks owed Mrs. Beer £2,090. Now, that was a huge amount of money back then, so this wasn't just some casual loan. This was a formal, legally binding court judgment. Here's the snag, though. Dr. Folks just didn't have that kind of cash lying around to pay it all in one go. So to try and sort things out, he and Mrs. Beer did what sounds like the most logical thing in the world. They sat down and hammered out a new deal. And their new agreement was super straightforward. Here's the plan. Dr. Folks pays £500 right away. Then he pays off the rest of the debt in scheduled installments. And in return for this, Mrs. Beer promised she wouldn't sue him or take any other legal action. Seems like a perfectly reasonable solution, right? What could possibly go wrong? And Dr. Folks, to his credit, was a man of his word. He stuck to this new plan perfectly. He made that first big payment, and then he made every single installment right on time, until the entire original debt, the whole £2,090, was paid off completely. He did exactly what he promised to do. But just when Dr. Folks probably breathed a huge sigh of relief, thinking this whole mess was finally over, the story takes a wild and really unexpected turn. He was in for a very, very rude awakening. Yep, you're reading that right. After she had the very last payment in her hand, Mrs. Beer turned around and sued him all over again. Not for the original money, he'd paid that back, but for the interest that the debt had racked up over all those years. We're talking about a few hundred more pounds. And this is the part where you just have to ask, wait, what? How could she do that? They had an agreement. She promised she wouldn't take any more legal action. So why wasn't that promise binding? What's the loophole here? To understand what happened, we need to pull back the curtain on a really fundamental core idea in contract law. It's a concept that decides whether a promise is just, words, or if it's a bargain the law will actually enforce. And it all comes down to one crucial word: consideration. So, what on earth is consideration? The easiest way to think about it is as the price you pay for someone else's promise. For a contract to be real, it can't be a one-sided gift. Both people have to give something of value. It has to be a two-way street, a genuine exchange. Okay, let's apply this idea to their new deal. What was the exchange? What price did each person pay? Well, Mrs. Beer gave a promise not to sue. But what new thing of value did Dr. Folks give in return? He gave her part of a debt he was already legally required to pay. See the problem? He wasn't giving her anything new. He was just doing something he was already obligated to do. And in the cold, hard eyes of the law, that is not fresh consideration. Now, you might be thinking the court just cooked this up on the spot. But nope, they were actually leaning on a legal rule that was already ancient, from a famous case way back in 1602 called Pinnell's case. And that old rule is crystal clear. Just paying part of a debt isn't, by itself, good enough to legally cancel the whole thing. You gotta offer something more. So, with this centuries-old principle as their guide, the case made its way all the way to the top, the highest court in the UK at the time, the House of Lords. And their final decision would set a precedent for generations of lawyers and judges. The judge, the Earl of Selborne, laid it out perfectly. He basically said that Dr. Folks promising to pay money he already owed was not a valid price to buy Mrs. Beer's promise to forgive the rest of the debt. For that specific promise, to forget the interest, there was no two-way exchange. It was a one-sided deal. So, the final ruling was in. Mrs. Beer won. Dr. Folks had to pay the interest. Their new, common-sense agreement was thrown out because it was legally unenforceable, all because Dr. Folks hadn't provided any new consideration for her promise. All right, so a dusty old case from over 140 years ago, why should we care about it today? Well, because this exact principle is still a cornerstone of contract law in many places around the world. It can affect everything from big business deals to that little agreement you made with your neighbor. So how could Dr. Folks have made that deal stick? This is the key takeaway. He just needed to offer something new, anything new. For instance, he could have offered to pay a bit of the debt earlier than it was legally due. That would have counted. Or, as that quirky old case amusingly suggested, he could have given something else of value. And it could be anything, even a horse, hawk, or robe. Yeah, you heard that right. The point isn't that the value has to be equal, it just has to be different from the original obligation. Another way is to get it all down on a formal legal document called a deed, which basically bypasses the need for consideration.
And all of this brings us right back to where we started. That deal to pay your friend $300 instead of $500? It feels right, but the law asks for more. It demands that both sides bring something new to the table. That's what turns a simple, everyday promise into an ironclad contract. So the next time you make a deal, it's worth asking yourself, is this just a promise, or did we both pay the price?